Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm your host, Vikas Swarup. This week, we focus on a unique regional grouping. It links 5 countries of South Asia and 2 countries of Southeast Asia. It is an important pillar of India's neighborhood first and Act East policies, and it holds the potential to become the engine of economic growth for the entire region. I'm talking about Bimstec, the Bay of Bengal initiative for multi-sectoral technical and economic cooperation, which held its 5th summit virtually on the 30th of March in Colombo. Headquartered in Dhaka, Bimstec is an inter-regional grouping that seeks to foster regional and economic cooperation amongst nations in the littoral and adjacent areas of the Bay of Bengal: India, Thailand, Myanmar, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan. The journey of Bimstec began 25 years ago in Bangkok on the 6th of June 1997 through the Bangkok Declaration, when Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and Thailand came together as Bimstec to accelerate economic growth and social progress across multiple sectors, ranging from trade and technology to environment and energy. Myanmar joined in December 1997, and Nepal and Bhutan were added to the group in 2004. Bimstec today represents 21.7% of the world's population and a combined GDP of $3.8 trillion, making it a potent vehicle for accelerated economic development through greater integration. For India in particular, the group has become quite important since SAARC continues to remain hostage to Pakistan's intransigence to implement tools of regional integration and security cooperation. In October 2016, when India hosted the BRICS summit in Goa, it reached out to the leaders of Bimstec to interact with the BRICS heads. The first meeting of the national security chiefs of Bimstec member states was hosted by India in New Delhi in March 2017 to coordinate action against spread of terrorism, violent extremism, and radicalization. In 2019, India invited all Bimstec heads of state and government to Prime Minister Modi's oath-taking ceremony for the 2nd term. In April 2021, the group's foreign ministers met virtually, and now the much-delayed 5th summit of Bimstec has taken place under the chairmanship of Sri Lanka. Prime Minister Modi, in his address at the summit, laid out his vision for Bimstec, saying that with our region facing challenges of health and economic security, the need of the hour is unity and cooperation. Today is the time to make the Bay of Bengal a bridge of connectivity, a bridge of prosperity, a bridge of security. The summit adopted the charter or constitution of Bimstec, thereby giving it an international personality with an emblem, a flag, and a formal architecture that defines its goals, institutions, and long-term vision. Leaders also approved a major rationalization of sectors of cooperation, pruning them down from 14 to 7 areas, each assigned to a member state as the lead. India will lead the security pillar. A 10-year master plan for transport connectivity supported by the Asian Development Bank was also adopted. Prime Minister Modi announced a $1 million ad hoc grant for the operational budget of the Bimstec Secretariat and another $3 million assistance to revive the grouping's Center for Weather and Climate, which is an important part of the disaster management and disaster risk reduction agenda. 3 new agreements were signed, focusing on mutual legal assistance in criminal matters, cooperation between diplomatic academies, and the establishment of a technology transfer facility in Colombo. The group also agreed to work towards the finalization of the Bimstec Coastal Shipping Agreement, the Motor Vehicles Agreement, and to make electricity grid interconnectivity a reality. To discuss the 5th summit and examine the promise and challenges of Bimstec, I am joined by 2 leading experts. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia is Distinguished Fellow Gateway House, former Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs, and former Ambassador to Myanmar, Mexico, South Africa, and Kenya. A prolific columnist, he is also the author of 3 books on India's contemporary foreign policy, Myanmar, and Africa. Dr. Constantino Xavier is a Fellow in Foreign Policy and Security Studies at the Center for Social and Economic Progress and a non-resident Fellow at the Brookings Institution. He leads the Sambandh initiative on regional connectivity, which examines India's political, security, and economic relations with the South Asian neighborhood. His research has been published in various journals, and he has taught and lectured at several universities as well as Indian training institutions. Let me begin with you, Ambassador Bhatia. The 4th Bimstec Summit was held in Nepal in 2018. There were certain expectations from the 5th Summit that it would re-energize the organization after a long gap caused by the pandemic. Have those expectations been fulfilled?
Thank you, Vikas. It's a privilege to be at the receiving end of your questions. I would like to answer this question both as a former diplomat and also as a close observer of Bimstec and as a friend of Bimstec. My answer would be that the expectations raised at Kathmandu 4 years back have been fulfilled to a considerable extent, but not entirely. Fundamentally, if we had managed the time, perhaps we could have saved at least a year. That is, we could have secured the same outcome last year. Essentially, what has happened is that the Bimstec now has got a new charter, as you said in your introduction. It has rationalized the sectors of cooperation. Now every country knows exactly in which specific area it has to operate and show the leadership. In addition, of course, there are these 3 agreements which have been signed, and we can clearly see that the institution is moving forward. But if we go back to what the design was in Kathmandu, I think it is important that there seems to be little progress in Bimstec development cooperation in terms of forming it, because clearly this institution needs a lot of funding support, and we have to try to secure that. Then in the domain of free trade agreement, I think more work needs to be done. It is an old story going back to 2004 when the framework agreement was signed. There was very clearly a reference to this, but we hope that there will be greater vigor and energy on this as well. And then one more point I can mention on the Secretariat. I think there was a clear signal that we should strengthen it, we should empower it, but India was the only country which matched its words with action, which announced, as you said rightly, a very significant funding support. I wish the others had done it, particularly the outgoing chair and the incoming chair, but I think it is incumbent on all of us to really support the Secretariat, not just by words, but practical signals.
Dr. Xavier, Bimstec is not only a bridge between South and Southeast Asia, the sub-region also accounts for 10% of India's external trade. So what are the economic stakes in the success of Bimstec?
Thank you for having me on the Diplomatic Dispatch. We've been talking about the Bimstec economic potential for many years, 25 years to be exact. These are richly endowed countries that are growing. Bangladesh has been a success story in terms of economic growth. India, of course, too. Nepal is trying to escape its lower income trap. Thailand is a strong manufacturing base today that is attracting investors. Sri Lanka is going through a difficult phase, but is still a strong economy with a strong GDP per capita. So I think integrating these economies has been the potential that has been tried, that countries have been trying to explore through Bimstec. But to integrate these economies, you need basic infrastructural connectivity and linkages. You need shipping routes. You need a common approach to the blue economy in the Bay of Bengal to explore fishery sustainably, to explore the natural resources of that region. You need inland multimodal connectivity to trade and allow people to connect from the seas to the coasts and inland to the hinterland economies of India, Nepal, and Bhutan, who are actually not connected to the Bay of Bengal, but depend on connectivity through the Bay of Bengal to trade with Southeast Asia and other economies. So I think in that sense, we've seen a long potential here for Bimstec. And the multimodal transport connectivity master plan that has now finally, after many years, been formally adopted, in fact, in a very delayed way, is a good indication in that sense, because all economies are growing, but they will not grow together unless they're linked through hard connectivity infrastructure to share and explore these common resources sustainably.
Ambassador Bhatia, you have argued in a recent article that for India, Bimstec is of increasing relevance for its neighborhood first policy, for ensuring stability and development in the Northeast, and for its Indo-Pacific strategy. Could you expound in more detail on how these three strands come together in India's approach to Bimstec?
Yes, indeed. Bimstec, as we know, has a total of 7 members, including India. So the rest of them, 6 of them are our neighbors. 5 of them are immediate neighbors. One, Thailand, is also a neighbor of great importance, close neighbor. So clearly, if we work at the regional level to promote cooperation and also improve security, then it is clearly a contribution to the neighborhood first policy. And therefore, the kind of investment that India has done into these relationships is enormous. It is significant, at the political level as well as at the ministerial and senior officials level. So I think we have to be quite satisfied that the neighborhood first policy is actually seen in action when we try to strengthen and promote Bimstec. The national priority for ensuring security and speedy economic development in the Northeast is also very much promoted and nursed by Bimstec, because on both sides of the northeastern region of India, on one side Nepal and Bhutan, and on the other side Myanmar, Bangladesh, and eventually Thailand, they all have their role to contribute to the security and economic development of the Northeast, and vice versa. Therefore, clearly we cannot today imagine or envisage the kind of future we have for the Northeast without a very successful, effective and active Bimstec. And thirdly, Indo-Pacific. I think this is the latest version of Act East policy, and we often do not realize that the Bay of Bengal is really the connection, the link between South China Sea and our part of the Indian Ocean, so to say. And therefore, very, very obviously, this has a significant relevance for us as well.
Dr. Xavier, you mentioned the importance of connectivity for regional integration. Now, Prime Minister Modi has repeatedly emphasized that the biggest opportunity in the region is connectivity, whether it is trade connectivity, economic connectivity, transport connectivity, digital connectivity, or people-to-people connectivity. So how exactly is Bimstec promoting connectivity, and what are the challenges?
So I would say that more than opportunity, connectivity is a necessity. You cannot develop regionalism and integration without basic connectivity. You've mentioned a few sectors, but that starts with hard infrastructure connectivity. Studies we've done point that it's more difficult to connect sometimes to other Bimstec immediate neighbor countries of India than to other Southeast Asian countries. Today, it's easier to fly sometimes to the Gulf region or to Singapore than to immediate neighboring countries of India, Sri Lanka, or Bangladesh, for example, or Myanmar. Shipping routes. Sometimes you have to still transship containers in faraway ports because you don't have a coastal shipping agreement, for example, that is still being negotiated for years under Bimstec. So that is, I think, the necessity, the precondition which countries have to focus on to race against time, because other regions in the world have integrated. Southeast Asia and ASEAN today is a strong, vital, economically developed region because 10 states work together to develop that connectivity. The challenge, though, is that how do you develop connectivity? There are 2 ways. One is through Bimstec, where 7 states come together, develop joint agreements, for example, a motor vehicles agreement that allows trucks to drive freely across borders, or you do it bilaterally, country to country. And that is a challenge, I think, for India in particular to decide when does it want to do things, for example, with Bangladesh on a bilateral basis, on which there's been tremendous progress on connectivity, where it wants to do maybe things quadrilaterally together with Bhutan and Bangladesh, the BBIN framework, or in the case of Bimstec with 7 countries, 2 of which are ASEAN members, Myanmar and Thailand, that also offers an opportunity, but of course it's very difficult because bringing 7 people, 7 states, 7 organizations to the table and framing one framework is more difficult than doing things bilaterally. That will remain, I think, a challenge for Bimstec.
But we are already working on this highway which will link India and Myanmar and Thailand.
For 20 years now, that highway. But there's progress, but there are challenges again in Myanmar, for example. The India-Myanmar-Thailand trilateral highway today is suffering as a repercussion of the security conditions and the growing unrest in Myanmar. So that is another challenge you rightly point out, that there are issues sometimes on the security front, that you cannot have economic development and connectivity without basic security and stability in the neighboring countries of India.
Ambassador Bhatia, India will now lead the security pillar of the revised 7 pillars that Bimstec has adopted. So what are the common security challenges that the region faces, and is Bimstec equal to the task of addressing them?
I'm glad you have asked this question. Security and economic development are two faces of the same coin. One is not possible without the other. And one thing I should clarify right from the beginning, this is not just a concern for India, just one country. In fact, other countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Nepal, they all have faced all kinds of security challenges, and therefore it is a common challenge. And here we have to be very clear, I think, for viewers to appreciate that the lack of security or the absence of security can come first of all from the bad guys, from terrorists and criminals, but it can also emerge from natural disasters. And in addition, there could be now the cyber attacks, the cyber challenges. So that is also very much there. So in all of this, we usually use the term non-traditional threats to security, and I'm very happy that at the initiative of India, the rest of the membership has become very enthusiastic about this. And in fact, one can say in the last 4 or 5 years, when India took a very special initiative to empower Bimstec back from the days of the retreat of 2016 that you mentioned, a lot of progress has taken place. I think the process has been led by the national security advisors of these member countries, and I think it will proceed forward as well. But your second part of the question is also necessary to be answered. Is the Bimstec up to it? Bimstec would be up to it to the extent the governments remain interested in it. If it is just led by 1 or 2 or 3 countries, it will stall. And therefore, I think in a serious manner, I have to mention that some countries feel that there is a overstress on the security pillar of Bimstec. So I think it is important to keep a security pillar and development pillar in good balance. We must proceed forward on both aspects.
Dr. Xavier, as Ambassador Bhatia mentioned, the framework agreement for the free trade area, for the free trade agreement between the Bimstec countries was signed way back in 2004, but it has not really made much headway. Even at the 5th summit, all the leaders could agree on was to call for speedy implementation of the FTA. So what is holding this FTA back?
So I think there are 2 or 3 different reasons that have explained this delay of almost 20 years now that we've been talking about some type of free trade agreement in the region. My sense, I agree with Ambassador Bhatia that there's security and development going hand in hand, as I also had mentioned, but if you have a very weak organization, Bimstec, if you have 7 very different countries with different income levels, it may be a bridge too far to overload the organization with security cooperation. The history of regional integration shows us that generally regional integration, the European Union, Mercosur, South America, ASEAN has done better when you start by integrating your basic ingredients of trade, manufacturing base, and industry, and then spill over into political and security issues. So that is one, I think, decision that of course Bimstec, there are different views on how to do this, but I think by focusing on too much, Bimstec had 14 working groups until formally yesterday, now finally has 7, so it started very ambitiously, and therefore good news that it's now reducing. I think it's particularly good news that Bangladesh now is leading the Trade and Investments Working Group, because Bangladesh has been the most activist country of Bimstec and in the region on trade agreements, right? Far more than India, in fact, enthusiastic about those agreements. Another reason why I think also we have to put the FTA of Bimstec in context is that studies point to the limited benefits of an FTA. Because India, in fact, signed the South Asia Free Trade Agreement with its neighboring countries of Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, the 4 other members of Bimstec. So there's only Myanmar and Thailand left. Myanmar, of course, is going through a difficult situation, an economy that is still quite weak. Thailand is going through its own problems, but that is really the only benefit that could be even dealt with bilaterally between India and Thailand. So I think a variety of factors explain why this has been delayed, and why I also think I would put little hope in what we've heard yesterday about the possibilities of a free trade agreement being revived in terms of the Bimstec plans from 2004.
Ambassador Bhatia, since SAARC continues to remain in limbo, is Bimstec the only platform available for India for cooperation within the region? And do you see Bimstec substituting SAARC eventually?
For the present, it seems to be the only instrument or platform available for regional cooperation. Of course, for the wider region, we have Indian Ocean Rim Association, and for Southeast Asia, we do have also the platform of India Southeast Asian Summit that takes place every year. But for our immediate large part of South Asia, this is the one. Therefore, we must invest in it as much as we can. On your second question, no, I don't think Bimstec was meant to be and can hardly ever serve as the substitute for SAARC. If it was supposed to be a substitute, why would in 1997 India and these countries create Bimstec? The fact is that our region needs more, not less, regional cooperation. We hope that someday some of our neighbors will understand the situation better and create conditions congenial for us to start putting more life and activism in SAARC as well. But until that happens, I think the priority should be to truly activate and empower Bimstec. That is where our collective future and welfare lies.
Dr. Xavier, with China making growing inroads in the geo-economic space of the Bay of Bengal, how should Bimstec respond to the Chinese challenge?
I like the way you put it, geo-economic, because that is really what is at play. China has delivered on financial assistance, on loans, on grants, sometimes with quite negative dimensions. We know of those burdens that China brings with it sometimes, but it has de facto emerged as a country that reliably, consistently offers economic solutions to many of these countries to upgrade their economies, to modernize and to support the developmental aspirations of their people. If you go to Kathmandu, to Colombo, to Yangon today, that is what you hear about China, despite also concerns about China. But I'd say that more than what Bimstec can do as a response, Bimstec itself, I think from India's perspective, is a response to China. It is a response in the sense that India realizes that a multilateral cooperative framework is far superior to a bilateral, quick, shortcut approach to working out with countries. So it is in India's interest and in neighboring countries' interests also that tend to be smaller, small economies, less demographically and geographically salient than India, to strengthen Bimstec and to do it the hard way, which goes back to the initial point I made about how regionalism with many countries takes longer time, but is much more sustainable in offering solutions. And I sense that many of the other Bimstec member states now are starting to realize that the grass isn't that green across the Himalayas, that China comes with tremendous burdens in this bilateral approach, and therefore that they also recognize that it's in their interest to work through Bimstec for a stronger Bay of Bengal regional.
Your final thoughts on what more can be done to make Bimstec a stronger, more effective and result-oriented organization. Ambassador Bhatia would like to go first.
Certainly. Vikas, I would offer three specific suggestions for this purpose that you have in mind, and I really appreciate your asking this question. First of all, I think one would urge that political leaders will begin to find a little bit more time for this very important platform for regional cooperation.
I think they have already agreed that now the summits will be held every 2 years.
Right. So one summit in 5 years was not enough at all. One summit in 2 years looks good, but our essential goal should be an annual summit one in which they find 24 hours to be together, a retreat, an informal discussion involving the prime ministers and their aides, and then a formal summit. That will give them enough time to frankly quiz our former colleagues, the officials, and of course our respected ministers, and really empower them and ask them hard questions as to how we can really move this forward. Anything less than that, things really begin to sort of slip. The second point, I think, which is really very important, is that we have to enhance the visibility, the international visibility of Bimstec. We are getting a golden opportunity. Next year, India will host G20 if all goes well. This is the time when we can weave somehow in a suitable manner, in a creative manner, Bimstec onto the program and agenda of G20. After all, this is the region, as you said yourself, of 21% of world population. G20 cannot succeed if Bimstec region does not succeed. So a kind of weaving together would be very important. And finally, I was very happy that although perhaps Prime Minister Narendra Modi was the only leader who supported the Secretary General's suggestion that Bimstec must set up an eminent persons group. Yeah. I hope India will have sufficient influence on others to operationalize this suggestion, because Bimstec cannot really be just a club of governments. People should have a voice in it, and if there are ideas, they should be taken in order to ensure a very bright future for Bimstec.
Dr. Xavier, your thoughts?
See, the promise to meet every 2 years is very old. It's not from yesterday and has not happened. It's the 5th summit in 25 years. So it's obviously, there is a hope, but hope is not a policy. I would just mirror that with, despite of course the need from political impetus from the top, the buck eventually stops with the bureaucracies to flesh out the agreements, and with the organization's secretariat. All strong regional organizations have strong secretariats with experts on transportation, trade, different sectors, and in this case 7 now that Bimstec has agreed on. So I would say a strong secretariat, endow it with experts, with the bureaucracy, with the technical know-how to steer the agenda, and finally, realize the Kathmandu Declaration of 2018, which remains the most ambitious document and now has at least led to the Bimstec Charter, which is good news. But to fulfill that, we need a strong secretariat, and I would say a focus on everything that is economic connectivity infrastructure. If Bimstec focuses on that, it will certainly grow stronger and deliver more to its people in terms of development and growth across the region.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bhatia and Dr. Xavier. The Bay of Bengal region is now widely viewed as an integrated space for security, connectivity, and development. The 5th Bimstec Summit has articulated a clear vision for this region's peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable future. India has much at stake in ensuring the success of Bimstec, and we will keenly follow the future evolution of this unique grouping. That is all for this edition of Diplomatic Dispatch. Till I see you again next week, good night and goodbye.